Hello and welcome to Face2Face with me. I'm Desi Anwar, in a program that brings to your screen and where we meet people who make a difference to our lives. Globalization and our interest in modern culture makes us a part of the global citizen. However, it often comes at the expense of knowing who we are, where we come from, and what is our national identity. In this episode, I talked to one person who has dedicated the last 25 years of his life to understanding the Indonesian literature as well as to present it to the world. He is John McGlynn, an American living in Indonesia, and who, through his foundation, has translated many Indonesian literary works, the novels, plays, and poetry, into English, thus ensuring that the world too can appreciate the wealth of the Indonesian literary tradition and understand the Indonesian identity.
Salah Asuhan, Siti Nurbaya, Layar Terkembang, Belenggu. These are of the well-known classic Indonesian novels that form an important part of Indonesia's literary wealth. The origins of Indonesian literature can be traced back to as early as before the 20th century, when it was still Malay lit and written in traditional forms, such as the syair, pantun, gurindam, kayat, often known as the Pujangga Lama. The next periods that followed mirrored the history of Indonesia and referred to the generations they lived in. These are Sastra Melayu Lama, Balai Pustaka generation, Pujangga Baru, and then followed by the 1945 generation, 1950 generation, 1966 generation, and the 1980s to 1990s reform generation, as well as the current generation 2000. This means that Indonesia is home to a wide array of classical, modern, and contemporary literature written in a common language, Bahasa Indonesia, that forms a unifying force of the nation. Until now, there exist many young writers that continue the Indonesian literary tradition, producing quality works that reflect the current trends, ideas, and concerns of their times. It is the interest in the wealth of history that Indonesian literature possesses that made John McGlynn, an American who came to Indonesia almost 3 decades ago, decide to devote himself to studying the country's novels, plays and poetry, and to translate and publish them into his native tongue, English, and make them known to the world. I visit John at his house in the heart of Jakarta.
Hello, Daisy. How are you, darling?
I'm very well. Thank you for inviting me to your absolutely beautiful house. Wow. Look at this, and full of paintings and sculptures.
That is my hobby.
Your hobby?
Yeah, well, I started as a fine arts major in 1970. 1970 I started as a fine arts major. And one of my teachers...
This is where?
Wisconsin, Milwaukee. And one of my teachers had a shadow puppet. And so I started making shadow puppets, American shadow puppets. And that's what actually brought me into Indonesia. But meanwhile, I've never forgotten my roots in art. And I've always tried to help young Indonesian painters. And,
okay. And this is a very famous
yeah, that's by
painting
Dede Ere Supriya, dating from 1981.
Which brings me to that point about learning wayang all the way in Wisconsin. I'm impressed, but let's take a look around your house.
Come on in.
Thank you, John. So I'm interested, John. I mean, you came to Indonesia in 1976, and you mentioned earlier that you actually studied the shadow puppet in Wisconsin.
That's right.
At university. Now, before moving here, I mean, how did you manage to know about shadow puppets, or interested about learning about shadow puppets in Wisconsin, in the US?
Well, as I said before, I was a theater and fine arts major, and a friend and I started a puppet company, an American puppet company in Milwaukee. And we were both interested in Asian puppetry. He was interested in Japanese bunraku, and I started studying wayang kulit. But not to become a dalang. I did not want to become an Indonesian dalang. I wanted to create a new American theater. And after a bit of research, I found that there was a dalang, Ki Umar Topo, who was teaching in Seattle. So I moved to Seattle, and there kind of began to fall in love with Indonesia.
But how did you end up actually staying on in Indonesia? What about your dreams of your theatre and your...
Well, very soon after I started studying Indonesian literature at the university, I met Sapardi Djoko Damono, Bunu Muriati, Widarti Gunawan. I began to meet a lot of Indonesian writers. And I was already pretty fluent in Indonesian by that time, and so whenever there was a poetry festival, a writing, something going on, they would ask me, "Oh, John, could you translate something for me?" And so I would. And I began to actually fall in love with the process of translating. And so instead of, so I decided in 1978 to go back to the University of Michigan, where I did my master's, and I did that in Indonesian literature.
Okay, but what was it about Indonesian culture and the people that, I mean, you seem very, happy and very...
Well, part of it is that, I wouldn't live anywhere in the world where I didn't have friends. I have a large circle of friends here whom I view as family, and I am from a large family of 10 children, and I've always grown up with a lot of people around me, so I'm very used to...
So you didn't have culture shocks in the beginning?
Culture shock that way, no. I mean, people, I was very used to people. But the more I fell in love with Indonesia, the more I wanted to introduce Indonesia to the world. And that's the translation. I view literature from any country as the key to getting to know our culture.
A graduate of the University of Michigan at Ann Arbor with a master's degree in Indonesian language and literature, he is the translator of several dozen publications, both under his own name and his pen name Willem Samuels. His translations of works by Indonesia's most famous author, Pramudia Anantatur, which John translated under his pen name, have garnered much international praise. In 1987, along with 4 Indonesian writers and poets, Gunawan Muhammad, Sapardi Djoko Damono, Subagio Sastrowardoyo, and Umar Khayyam, he founded the Lontar Foundation. Through Lontar, he has edited, overseen the translation of, and published close to 100 titles of Indonesian literature. He has also produced 24 films on Indonesian writers and more than 30 films on Indonesian performance tradition.